And in the spirit of Open Montreal, I put together a presentation that's really more of a, I would say almost like a trend forecast, right? As we all think about building an AI, I wanted to surface certain trends that we've seen perhaps. And I've been involved in technology my whole career. I learned to program when I was 13, which is quite some time ago, on the earliest home computers. And I had the privilege of helping start Wired magazine in San Francisco in the early and mid 90s, which some of you probably are aware of as a magazine. I mention it because that was like in 1995, I was there watching the onset of this innovation called the internet and the World Wide Web. And it was a really big deal at the time. And here we are in 2025, and I'm finding echoes of that energy in the way AI is kind of appearing on the landscape. It actually reminds me a lot of 1995. And the question is, well, why is that reminder? And then I'll just point out to everyone, things didn't necessarily go so great, right? After 95, right? It's like something wrong happened. And that's pretty important, and we're gonna look at that. Like, what was wrong? And if that sort of is about a bigger trend, maybe we should be aware with AI, like that this might overtake a lot of what we are seeing today. So I want to welcome you to the Mirage. And there's this pattern that begins with a Mirage. And let's just start with the AI Mirage. So as we see here, there was quite an explosion that happened starting in late 2022. I call it the shockwave. In November of 22, ChatGPT released. Yes, we all know, 100 million people in like 60 days, fastest growth ever. Soon after that, we've got this extraordinary kind of ability to create imagery, the Pope in a puffer being, I think, sort of a takeoff point culturally, right? Where people are like, oh my God, the Pope in a puffer. God, that's amazing. And then we have Sora that came soon after that, creating really these completely synthetic images, and that brought on this new wave of fear around what's truth, what's not truth. And then if that weren't enough, DeepSeek came out earlier this year with a model that was remarkably small, highly performant, everyone then freaked out some more. Like, oh my God, what's happening? And of course, whenever people freak out, lots of money starts moving everywhere, right? And so we had the money wall kind of kick in, where NVIDIA was the first big beneficiary here. In mid-2023, they hit $1 trillion. That sounds like a lot of money. I mean, there was a time when nobody was worth $1 trillion. Now, okay. And then soon after that, wow, make it $3 trillion. That's just an astonishing acceleration. We had, Sam Altman raised $6 billion on a $157 billion valuation, which seems kind of small compared to the others, but frankly is an outrageous amount of money that I think was the largest private investment ever at that point. And then we've got these boys doing, committing $100 billion a year. The CEO of Amazon, CEO of Google, Microsoft. Think about that, $100 billion a year. That's like more than state budgets for God knows what. That is a lot of money. Like, what is going on? Where is it all going? Then there was the backlash, right? Steve Wozniak, Elon Musk, they signed a big letter saying, stop everything for 6 months, and nobody really cares or pays attention, and you can kind of wonder why Elon Musk even said that. And then Sam Altman gets fired for 3 days. That's like weird. And then nobody knows why, and I think it's because it was supposed to be a nonprofit, and now it's definitely not a nonprofit. But then he comes back 3 days later, and then a little later from there, the EU actually passes pretty strict AI rules, and they kind of compare AI to nuclear weapons, and we need to regulate it as such. So we have a bit of a struggle right here. But wait, is this time actually different? Right? After all of the panting and the heart throbbing and the crazy amounts of money, really, is this the biggest thing ever? So let's just take a step back for a minute. We can remind ourselves, there once upon a time, people invented steam energy. People invented electricity. They invented nuclear atomic power. These were like really big shifts that occurred. Is this time really different? There were massive movement revolutions. The railroads, the automobiles. God, we could fly all over the world. We could make rockets go into space. I think those are pretty big, right? And then we have the extraordinary communications revolutions, which begins to bring us closer to AI. You've got innovations like the penny press, the newspaper in the 19th century, which changed the world. Like suddenly, for 1 penny, you could read the news. Anybody could buy a newspaper. It was shocking. You had the onset of radio, the telephone, broadcast television, and then, of course, the personal computer, right, which really emerged in the late 70s, early 80s. And finally, We love it, we hate it, our smartphone, right? The thing that just has captivated the whole world, and now billions of people have a computer, including me, in my pocket right now. But really, what's the rhythm going on here? There's a cadence, and the cadence is like from mainframe computers or the priesthood of programmers that control what you do to suddenly a computer in your house, right? It's a telephone operator. You know, once upon a time, if you wanted to make a call, there was literally one line, and you picked up the phone, and you had to get online to make your call. This is like 50, 70, 80, 90 years ago, and if someone else was on the phone, and you picked up the phone, you heard their conversation. It was very rude. You should hang up. No privacy. It was like kind of bonkers, and there was a person in charge of switching it. And now we've got really the opposite. We all have these phones in our pockets. You've got this situation where once upon a time, a single person in the United States, Walter Cronkite, basically was the source of truth. And now we've got people generating, you know, millions of people watching whatever they're doing on various platforms like TikTok and so on. So you're probably starting to pick up on this rhythm, right? It's clearly a rhythm from centralization to decentralization and back again. Centralization, decentralization, centralization, decentralization. This is a pace that we see. And in the case of AI and technology, it's actually really kind of critical to understand this because it's going to predict some of the tensions we're seeing in AI right now. In 1997, a guy named Eric Raymond wrote a very important paper called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. How many people here have even heard of this paper? Raise your hand. I see 3 people. Those of you who have not heard of this paper, I encourage you to read it. It basically is the manifesto for the open source software movement, right? Eric Raymond, who is a computer programmer, made the case that the real power in building sort of really performant software was in a decentralized approach as opposed to a centralized approach. Think of that as that mainframe with the priesthood, right? And now, to this day, open source software has been like a huge piece of driving our innovation. There's this notion really of architecture without architects. This picture on the side here is from a seminal book in the 60s, in fact, called Architecture Without Architects, which set the pace for a lot of the philosophy. Habitat 67 is built on that basis, right? So Cathedral has a single architect, a bazaar, kind of evolves over time because something has created an environment where that can happen. This actually gets to AI. So the question we can ask ourselves now, is AI going to be a cathedral or a bazaar, right? Is there going to be one architect that controls it, or will it be distributed with us responsible? We think of the difference here as artificial intelligence versus personal intelligence, right? And there's this phrase that I've been thinking a lot about called personal intelligence. And so in a personal intelligence context, we are the owners of that AI, of that data experience, of that synthesis. In the cathedral model, right, we are the product. We give all of our data over. That data is used to create the experience, and it's kind of this rather cynical exchange, but it seems like one we've done over and over again, especially in recent years. So we're at a fork in the road right now in 2025. Because that fork basically says either we're going to go towards the way certain people would like artificial intelligence to go, where it basically runs in the cloud on these big mainframes, as opposed to on our devices locally. The accrual really builds up, the value accrues to the kind of central organization. Think of it like OpenAI, Microsoft, versus us. And ultimately, what's behind that data model? It is mass surveillance, right? Whether it's in different cultural contexts, it doesn't matter. It's all mass surveillance. It's pretty disturbing. Yeah, you could mention that, but you could say the United States of America now too, right? I mean, is there a big difference between Meta and the Chinese Communist Party today? I'm not really clear, right? In terms of social credit, gathering information, and making decisions about your future based on your past in ways that you have no longer any control over. AI, if we don't watch out, will make this probability even higher, right? Even more intimate, even more intense. So what is the pattern here? And someone mentioned a pendulum to me earlier today, and here we are. I warned that person there would be a pendulum in the deck. There's a pattern swinging from centralization to decentralization. And there's a playbook here, and I called it, for the purpose of this deck, the Cathedral Playbook. And you can kind of see this cadence, right? You begin with some sort of promise, ChatGPT, like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then you've got this kind of wild scramble to innovate around it, right? And you kind of see this burst. We've all been experiencing it in this room. I could build this, I could do that. Isn't it fun? And I go and I homestead and I try to create something. And then at some point, people start to discover like the choke point. Everyone has to funnel into something. And clearly right now, that choke point feels like the large language models. Like you're somehow funneling into that. Once that choke point is identified, capital, which we'll talk about in a minute, which has its own kind of logic, flows to that opportunity to enhance the choke point. First, you got to define what the choke point is. You can't do it until you do. That fury of money that I showed on that slide earlier is because of the choke point being identified. Who's going to win that race? Why is Microsoft and so on putting $100 billion a year? That staggering number. It's to basically dominate that choke point. And we've seen this in the tech context, right? And it's kind of interesting to look at this cycle, how it's happened before, right? The PC, which I remember so well, this notion of, hey, everybody's gonna have a computer. You can like augment your intelligence. And then, Bill Gates does this kind of accidentally genius thing is he gets the contract to write Microsoft disk operating system with IBM, and IBM doesn't really understand that they should have asked for just literally bought the software. They give him a non-exclusive license. So he's like, cool, I can sell this to other computer companies, and that's what actually happens, and that leads eventually to Windows, and that becomes the choke point, right? And so there was this thing called the Wintel monopoly, which you may remember, Windows and Intel, dominated the whole industry. Then we've got the web, and I remember this extremely clearly, right? This was the mid-90s moment that I was referencing. Anyone can be a publisher, anyone can reach anybody. And then people figured out the choke point. The choke point was discovery, and Google actually figured out how to do that. Yahoo was competing with them to do that. There were others like Alta Vista, which people don't even remember anymore, trying to do that. But Google figured out with the PageRank algorithm. They found the choke point, they took it. You look at social media, this is fascinating. I mean, people had a vision for social media for so long. I mean, when Zuckerberg created Facebook in 2004-ish, there was like nothing novel about the idea, really. It's just the timing was better. And he had one little insight, which is you had to be your real self on the network. That was his little insight. Before then, you could be pseudonymous, right? You could be like on MySpace, anything. Well, they figured out the choke point was basically the social graph. Meta controls the social graph. TikTok does not have the same leverage. Nobody does. It's really Facebook that has that depth. And finally, mobile, right? Everyone's gonna have a computer in their pocket, isn't that great? And then we see the same choke point appear. It's actually the app stores. Steve Jobs didn't even think that he needed an app store. When he launched the iPhone, there was no app store. There actually wasn't one. It took 18 months for them. He didn't want to do it. He was like, no, no, no. And then people realized, no, we have to do it. And from there, people realized, damn, that's the choke point. We're going to control all the services on this device. AI is the fastest pattern we've ever seen on this, right? These other things took a bit of time. Like here, we're like, damn, we're moving so fast. And so we're really we've cleared the numbers 1, 2, and 3. We've cleared the discovery, we figured out the choke point, right? And now we're pouring the money in to create that toll booth. And this is awfully close to becoming sealed. So there's a reason this always happens. There's a bit of a formula here. There's like this promise of the bazaar, meaning, yes, this sort of abundance of creativity, of connection, of activity. It's like a market, right? You're creating a market. At the same time, capital loves to back winners and concentrate, right? And so you put those two things together, and it's this painful cycle that appears and reappears. And it's almost like you want to say out of human control. Like it's just sort of something destinal about it. And then the question is, can we regain some control? Which will bring us to just a little fun fact. These are the world's 10 most valuable companies. 7 of the 10 are tech companies that created choke points, right? So number 1, Microsoft. Number 2, Apple. Number 3, NVIDIA, right? The control on the chips. Then we've got Google after that, Amazon, and finally, coming in at number 7, not one of these cathedrals, Saudi Aramco. So congratulations to them. And then from there, you go on to Facebook, Taiwan, the semiconductor manufacturer. And then finally, we have 2 little ones, Berkshire Hathaway and Eli Lilly, that are not cathedrals. So there are bazaars that do endure. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about the things that actually work. And I just put 3 up here, right? The scientific method is a bazaar. It's actually been pretty great for 250 years. It's driven so much, no one controls that, right? But there's a process, it's a protocol basically, right? A protocol to find truth. Container shipping actually is one of these things. Someone came up with this idea, I really don't know who, I should have looked it up. But yeah, there's these crazy containers, and it became a module of commerce that nobody controls, nobody owns. You don't have to pay a royalty to make a container, and it unleashed just this efficiency where, well, for good or bad, it's incredible what we're able to do now efficiently. And then of course these internet standards, which were very human designed, very intentional as well, and came in a beautiful moment in time where people explicitly said, nobody's going to own these things, like TCP/IP, the underlying protocol of the internet, the email transfer protocol, the domain name service protocol. All these things were basically given away for free. And so we can reach a little conclusion here. Applications get owned, protocols get shared. So this brings us a little bit closer to AI. And I have this little metaphor of a bicycle. So Montreal is really big on bicycles, and I'm going to be big on bicycles but in a different context right now. So there's this notion of the bicycle for the mind. And I will point out this ad from Apple Computer in 1979, where Steve Jobs, happily hugging his computer, basically says, the personal computer is a bicycle for the mind. And he explicitly uses that analogy because this is about augmenting human thought by using this tool, right? And if you speed up to 1997 when he takes the company back, he actually says, think different. It's not a coincidence. Like, he really has an understanding here. And I'll say he's not the only one to have this understanding. What he came out of was a culture where the internet itself was started by this. The people who funded the internet in the 60s had a notion of man-machine symbiosis. Like, they actually used that phrase. And they spent millions of dollars connecting universities together to enhance research through what was basically the beginning and origin of the internet in the mid to late 60s. This notion of a bicycle for the mind is very much what we think about with AI today. Like, why are we using this thing? It should be to augment our capacity, not replace us. And so we're back actually to a really deep philosophical idea that goes to the origins of a lot of the technology used. The personal computer and the internet actually come out of this idea. So the thing that we're facing now is basically, well, today's deal, if you take it as it is, we surrender all our data, help build these cathedrals. Or tomorrow's deal is that we own our data, right? And we basically begin to own our future. And I think of this phrase, control your context, control your outcomes, and you can't really see this here, but these are these parkour maniacs, doing stuff I would never dare to do, controlling their context, and therefore their outcomes. I mean, mad stuff, right? So what does it look like to fight back against this trend? Because we can fight back. We've been forewarned. You have been put on notice in this room now. There's basically three components: the architecture, the user experience, and the economics of AI. And let's just look at kind of how we might shift them. So from an architecture standpoint, this is what we know, right? It's going to fit on pretty much any phone pretty soon. And I don't know if it's going to fit on this device right here, but I like this device, and I think it should. We can also say from an architecture standpoint that an AI that knows you is better than a generic one, right? If it knows you, it's going to probably provide much better context to you. And this ability to have that AI in every phone begins to open up a deep possibility for ownership and personalization, because it's actually sitting on your phone, right? It's not running in a cloud anymore. This is imminently arriving. This is a very big deal. From a user experience standpoint, it's about the AI working for you as opposed to you working for it. And it's also about doing it in the background quietly, suggesting rather than asking. Meaning you don't have to constantly be prompting it and asking it. If it knows enough about you, it should be able to really help you in this intuitive way, like a bicycle for the mind, or like these guys from Wayne's World, helping you put stuff on beer. From an economic standpoint, you do move from a culture of extraction, right, where the cathedrals, are extracting value from your data, to one that's about fair attribution. This is actually very critical, because this is the point where it becomes self-sustainable if it's done right. So if your data is yours and stays with you, people will want to ask you questions around your data, services and so on, will want to have information about you. But if you're compensated in that exchange, well, that gets to be a much more fair distribution in the conversation. And it makes it more realistic that there's a meaningful reason to do this transaction, because why would people literally waste their money trying to, do that with you? The ability to actually understand your contributions. So a clear open meter, right? Meaning what exactly? That if you're giving data to build a process, agentically or otherwise, it should be metered. It should be understood that you did contribute this fraction of value, and that means you should get something back if in the end it turns out to be valuable. So that when value is created, essentially value earning, etc., comes back to you. Think of it more like being a shareholder, getting a dividend, being in a cooperative. There are reasons these things exist. It's because the collective creates value, and then all of us participating get something in return. That is the economic shift that would be necessary. Now, what's interesting about Montreal at this moment, I did promise I would have something about Montreal. It's a very interesting moment, because if you believe in this centralization, decentralization pulse, right, and this opportunity, Montreal has a very interesting opportunity to lead the way in this. And we should be mindful right here in this room right now, because we have a lot of little tricks in our bag. So first of all, we have this privacy by law, right? Bill 25 in Quebec, they're kind of a GDPR level thing. It's very, very strict level of kind of privacy. Now, why is this relevant? Now, in the world we're moving into, where your data might be in the United States, might be elsewhere, having something built in Canada that is like following our rules might become a competitive advantage in a world where people are more and more sensitive. That if I'm going to give a lot of personal data to an AI, I want to know that there's something that protects me. And if I don't live in a country with those protections, to what degree are companies built in Canada, literally made in Canada, now becomes a badge on these services. Made in Canada, that can start to mean something in terms of security and privacy. Second, yes, we have an incredible depth of AI training and education in this city. Like, we all know that, it's amazing. It was a really good foresight, actually, 10, 15 years ago that the country decided to do it. And so here we are, like with the right people in potentially the right place. We do have this ethics lineage, right? We know about it. Bangio, Hinton won a Nobel Prize, actually, related to this. That goes back to the first point around sort of made in Canada, the brand equity. We should leverage this for AI. We also have this new government that actually does want to invest, in GDP per capita. Well, meaning GDP per capita, meaning we should have more resources. We'll see if that happens. We don't really know. They talk, who knows? Which brings me to the final point, I think in a way the most important point. So I've been to so many Montreal meetups where people complain that Canadian investors don't take enough risk and they don't invest early enough. How many people here have heard people say that before? Raise your hand if you've heard, yes. You've heard this complaint. Now here's the really good news, guys. That's bullshit at this point. It doesn't matter. Because in the very early stages now of AI, the way things are moving, in the way we're talking about it, it doesn't take a lot of money to make a meaningful product in this way. Meaning what? Tens of thousands of dollars, and you might make meaningful progress. So if you don't actually need hundreds of thousands of dollars to get going, who cares if they're not writing you a check? It almost doesn't matter. This is really exciting because, frankly, it's been a systemic problem otherwise. So I do think it's so important to understand that you can get something going now for under like 25 grand and potentially make a lot of progress. That's to our advantage here in Montreal because we've got these other benefits and now we don't have the structural problem of, hey, we're not in Silicon Valley, we don't need to go there to raise this money. So in conclusion, really what we're saying here is be the protocol. What does that mean? It means embody these principles, right? Run AI on your devices. Every server should give you a private vault, meaning a private place where you can store your data, right? Where you know it's secure. Create systems that are honest and fair, where if you contribute to the training of a model, like it's metered. And if they're not going to do that and you're not going to get something in return, just don't do it and support the people who do it differently. And finally, that all gets to giving everyone a real stake in what they help build. Like, these are the principles. And the only way to make it happen is just to go out and do it with your own projects, just to make it happen. Because I think the time is here, people will come. So having said that, the theme is personal intelligence.